All of those assumptions, I think are done for political reasons. It's a way to say, watch out for them. They're black Republicans. They're trying to, take something away from the community. When in fact, what we're trying to do is actually bring an option to the community, an alternative. And that for African Americans to vote 90% Democrat is reckless. It is absolutely reckless. I became a Republican probably around 2002. I probably leaned more right of center than most of my friends. Most of my friends were either Democrats or liberals. And I guess they saw the world in a different light than I guess as a child growing up did. I always had a suspicion of government's intrusion, I think, in people's lives.
I think I discovered that I had conservative beliefs my sophomore year of college. I was blessed to have an opportunity to work for the at the time, the United States Speaker of the House, J. Dennis Hastert. And it was at that time that I recognized my conservative values and just the way that I think.
You could probably argue that I was organically conservative, but due to the fact that it was a little bit of a stigma to be black and conservative or Republican, I just registered as a Democrat by default. That having been said, I was becoming increasingly disenchanted with what I felt was the leftward drift of the Democratic Party.
I've always been a Republican. My parents always enforced self-improvement, self-empowerment, and it just came naturally. So it wasn't, I guess I'm not like typical black Republicans where they discover their political influence and tendencies later on.
I'm from the Bronx. I've lived in New York City my entire life, born and raised in the projects, actually. So it's odd that I ended up being a conservative Republican.
My mother, I think when we first started, my mom was just a staunch Democrat. I remember growing up as like 4 years old, my mom having the picture of Richard Nixon, as a dartboard. She'd throw dartboards at it. But I think through her sort of renewal of her spiritual commitment, I believe she chose to become more of a Republican, more of a conservative. So in that respect, she is. However, it's interesting that all of her daughters, that we've all sort of are very different in our own, how we've arrived at our own political spectrums too.
It's really interesting. I think the biggest misconception about black Republicans is that we are Republican because we think that somehow, first we have decided we hate our community.
That we're Uncle Toms, that we are out of touch,
that we are trying to be white, that we don't care about our communities.
Out of touch, Uncle Toms, wealthy.
We are somehow not really connected to this black experience, and so it makes it easier for us to be Republican.
And that we don't understand what it's like to live in the shoes of an everyday African-American struggling man.
The other idea is that, we join the Republican Party because there's an issue of self-hate. Hate for us being born black, as if it's a strike. The people I've talked to, we're very proud about our heritage. We're very proud about, where we've come in our family, but we make it a conscious decision based on what we truly believe in and not because it's the most comfortable or the most popular.
Looking in the mirror for the first time and saying I am a Republican, that was hard for me because I knew what the people around me expected. Living in such a liberal city, New York City is a bubble. We're really disconnected from the rest of the country in terms of the way we think. I knew people would expect me to be a liberal Democrat. They would expect me to vote for a person with a D behind their name, regardless of whether I knew what it meant or not. So saying I am a Republican was really poignant, and I was a little bit scared by it at first. Now I'm comfortable with it. I've had a lot of time to get comfortable with it. it's not easy to be a Bush defender. If you can defend Bush, I think you can defend almost anything.
There's a research think tank called the Joint Center for Economic Studies that does a lot of research on African Americans, and it finds that on most issues, actually African Americans, and especially younger African Americans, actually agree with the Republican Party. That is, if you took away the party label and just told a person, do you agree with this, do you agree with this, African Americans, for the most part, are overwhelmingly Republican in their beliefs. The problem, as the Joint Center mentions in its latest, I think, research paper, is that the Republican Party is seen as a white Southern party. And running around talking about states' rights is not necessarily the best way to effectively communicate and do outreach to the African American community.
One thing that the Republican Party, I think, has failed to do is to not expose themselves within urban America. I'm part of a new initiative called the Urban Conservative Movement. And what we do is we take Republican issues and take them to African American communities. I think that's the issue. I don't think that it's an issue of Republicans, blacks not being Republican just because. I think it's because the Republican Party and the GOP, historically and within the last 40 to 50 years, has not shown up to black America and has not showed up to, going further, urban America.
Republicans traditionally have this outlook of, we don't want to look at people by the color of their skin. Therefore, we're going to treat everyone the same. But we have a history in this country that we have to acknowledge, that we have different communities, different cultures, different ways to relate to people. And with having this outlook, which I understand and even agree, you have to look at people as people. However, we do have cultural differences, and with that, there's a loss, translation of how should we talk to the African American community. And I'll admit, just like anyone else, that there needs to be a change in the way that Republicans communicate to African Americans and just urban communities in general that reflects the diversity of the country.
I don't think necessarily the problem with them is substance. I do believe that it's one of tone. And I think the tone is often sort of harsh and hectoring and insensitive. And in a way, I think the Republicans have to strike the right balance. It doesn't mean sort of rolling over or kowtowing to anybody, but tone matters. Tone is very important. And if people feel like you're shouting at them, they get turned off.